of acceptance of a culture, I'll say a culture of candor.
Yeah.
And a culture that is one that does not point fingers and blame, that we accept that our students come to us as they are, and we need to deal with the issues the students bring to us as they are, and not begin to dissect why they are that way, but where we need to go together and build that partnership through, I guess, an honest conversation about the data, which can be, I know we talk a lot about our enrollment, and I think if we can have the same enthusiasm about student success as we have about building a new building, we'll really begin to make collective progress.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting about this conversation is we all care about student success, but now we're getting concrete about what success actually means. You know, what are the momentum points? What are the success metrics that tell us that students are going to be successful? The challenge is we've always had performance-based funding. The performance has been enrollment, right? We've been funded based on the enrollment we've had. Now we're being asked to kind of think about other kind of performance measures. I know, Larry, you participated in the GISS, right? The Governance Institute for Student Success in Ohio. You might want to share a little bit about that experience, because part of that was engaging this conversation pretty broadly.
Well, it really was kind of an eye-opener for me and for the other trustees and presidents that was at the GIS. And it was what seemed to be very innocuous, very mundane kinds of things turned out to be very substantial for us. One of them was the survey that they took prior to the GISS. They asked each trustee from each one of the campuses throughout the state of Ohio to fill in this survey. And it was like a 75-question survey. We filled that out prior to going to the GIS. And then we got feedback from it. Each individual college got feedback, which was kind of a self-assessment on how we interacted with the president, how we interacted with each other, what were some of the factors that were important to us, like access, which was a big one. So that was one of the few times in which the board, our board, had the opportunity to do a self-assessment, and that was really revealing to us. And we're going to go forward with that. The other aspect of it, which was extremely valuable, was that for the first time, we started to see a conversation elevated to the level of completion, success. The conversation that we had in the past was more or less about access. You know, it was about setting policy and
is
board.
Our enrollment up, or is
that's right. Is our enrollment up, or is it going down? And how do we fund that? And those kinds of issues. We had the chancellor from the state get up at the GIS and start to letting us know that completion and success was equally important. So now we're starting to see that conversation that you have access and you have success at almost the same level. We haven't gotten there yet, but we're moving in that direction.
And part of what that Governance Institute for Student Success did is actually give you data on what was happening in your college, right?
Absolutely.
So I know, Tom, you talk a lot about this idea of how you engage other trustees in this conversation, and it really is about moving beyond just enrollment data, right? What is the enrollment data in these programs or in this college, but saying, what are our success rates? How many folks are graduating? What's happening to them after they go through the program? Talk a little bit about how your kind of theory for engaging other trustees in that.
Well, I think that the important part of engaging the other trustees for us came about in part having some pretty good goals. But we have a pretty courageous president, Maury Moore, and we held a leadership dinner, and I'd sort of like to recommend some of this to all of you. We have a fairly strong state board, and I don't know how strong your state boards are, but we also have a strong president's organization and a trustees organization. And Maury started off a leadership dinner between these groups by saying, you know, I think there's a rift between the presidents and the trustees. And we first discovered, now, what is this rift? Well, the rift really is basically that the trustees have been listening to the President of the United States and our own leadership, and they've all been saying we need to educate and complete a lot more people in the next decade than we ever have before. And when you attend the president's meetings, they're very focused on how they're going to survive next year. They have less money, and we've had, in most schools, between 10 and 15% over-enrollment. And so what really came out of this dinner was, I think, a realization that if we support each other, we can do the necessary difficult things to affect some of these changes that we all know are necessary. Because, for example, the trustees do hire and fire the presidents, right? The presidents will do what the trustees ask them to do. But the trustees aren't going to do it if they find that they're being undercut, say, at a state level. And the state level is going to have to know that if they set a strong policy, that the presidents and the trustees will be there for them. So it's a little bit what Karen said, that they really have to feel that they have us behind us. For the trustees, we need to know that there are programs that we know will be successful, and we simply have to have the courage to be able to go forward, knowing that the real fulcrum for change really is the trustees. And I think it was a novel concept for us, that the fulcrum for that power really was us because of the fact that we will fire the presidents, but more than that, we really need to support them if they've got the courage to do the right thing.
And some of this comes into your conversations about what to measure. So Washington State's done a really good job of not just talking about completion across the stage, but also thinking about momentum points, right? Getting people, because here, I mean, the challenging thing in this conversation is we could increase completion quite easily in this country. The easiest way for us to increase completion, two big strategies. One is take better students, right? It's true. If you want your hospitals to if you want to lower mortality rates in your hospital, you move it to a suburb that's very safe and you stop doing heart surgery, right? So, but we are all committed to access and open access for low-income students, and so that's, we're completely against that idea. But the challenge is we have more middle-income students choosing us than ever before because we're a low-income, we're a low-cost route to this post-secondary education model these days. And so we have more high-ability students coming our way than ever before. We could easily raise completion rates just by changing our access agenda, which is an important part of that conversation. Yep. The other way to increase completion, folks, and you know this, is just lower standards and give degrees away in an easier fashion, right? I did martial arts for years, and I had a wonderful sensei when somebody would come in and say, how much money is it really going to cost me to finally get a black belt? And he would say, $6. And the idea is, what is the quality of that on the other side? And so I want to unpack the metrics piece of this, because I think when we're talking about what we're measuring, we can do some dangerous things with the metrics. And I know, Travis, at NGA, one of the things you've talked about is how do you really incite people to take completion seriously, but not kind of go off the rails with the wrong metrics because you've got all these people with all these different metrics frameworks that are coming your way. How do you kind of really wrestle with that at the state level and dealing with the governors?
Well, I think the first thing that we did in looking at this as states and as governors is to start from where we've not had a particularly productive conversation federally about college completion and how we track it. And we started into this thinking we need to do better. We need to make the invisible visible. We have too many students that for too many years have been invisible in our accounting for how we do in higher education. And so as we approached our metrics, we wanted to look at not just completion, but the road to and through completion, and also look at those groups that we call and foundations call the 21st century student, the part-time student, the adult student, the low-income student, the student of color. These groups that we've seen here and there have a more intentional focus on what is happening to these students as they make it through programs or as they progress through programs or not and get those certificates and degrees. Because we've come to the realization with the population that is here with us, these 21st century students, that policy making by anecdote hasn't worked, doesn't work, and won't work. And until we have some really solid metrics in front of us, we cannot get about the business of producing the number of certificate and degree holders that this economy needs. I mean, the economy, looking ahead, absolutely needs these people, but we need to know where we're cutting it and where we're not.
Yeah. I think that the point about the new normal, right, the new kinds of students that are coming, not really new, they've been with us for some time, but higher education policy writ large seems to be still focused on the living on campus, going full-time, not working kind of student, and I think now we're unpacking that and thinking about kind of different models. I know Larry at Sinclair, that's a big conversation with you all.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things that we've been doing it since 2003, to be honest with you. It's something we call a student success program or student success plan. And what it is focused on is at-risk students. And we've just purposely, since that time period, identified about 1,500 students each year at the freshman class level. We go in, we assess where they are. We work with them to develop an individualized learning plan, which a number of you have done. And then we couple that with some of our IT expertise, where we actually track and monitor these students as they progress through the system for the first 2 or 3 years. And this is a real-time, 24-hour-day assessment that we couple with counselors that work with them whenever they need. And the counseling that we provide to them is not just academic counseling, but it is counseling that's based upon what their needs are. Their needs may be academic, they may be financial, they may need some access to some facilities or something in the community that we don't have on campus, but the counselors will help them access that information that they need. So it's kind of a holistic answer to the needs of the students. And what we found, we're starting to see some early results. Now, we haven't gotten the kind of results that you would be looking at yet, but we're starting to see some improvements when we compare the students that have gone through the program. And these typically are students that are first generation. They typically are minorities. They're students that come from very low socioeconomic levels. And what we're starting to see is improvement in their completion rates. As I said, we started in 2003. We're starting to see some of the data right now. And our problem is how we're going to scale this. We've had about 2,000 students to go through the program. And we would like to get many, many more, but we got to scale it. We got to make sure that we're providing the kind of needs that they need, and we're starting to do that.
I mean, it's an important part of the conversation is figuring out how you take these intensive programs and focus programs and scale them to the point where they actually can move the needle. Because I've seen some of the analysis of some of the major initiatives we have, and they basically say, great initiatives, that learning community is wonderful, that intervention is wonderful, but in the end it's rounding error because you're not really touching the number of students that you need to be able to move that dial. Tom, we'll go Travis.
Yeah, I was just going to say that one of the really big issues we have, because we have programs, a couple that are really successful, opportunity grants. And opportunity grants are basically providing the student that you've talked about, the one that where we really want to move that needle. And we provide them with books and tuition, but additional monies too in counseling to get them through. And this is a group that typically, if we're lucky, we get like a 55% success rate. Mm-hmm. But with our opportunity grants, it goes up to 85%. Wow. And we have another program called iBest that is just an acronym for the BE is basic education and the ST is skills training, where we put together and combine those two things together, and it seems to make for a much more fruitful learning experience for the student. Once again, the success rates are like 85%.
The neat thing about iBest is it makes a point about cost that I think is an important conversation, because we know funding is going down and people think this is about doing more with less. The interesting thing about iBest is it's doing more with more in some ways, because how iBest is structured is 2 faculty members, a basic skills instructor and a vocational technical instructor working together with that student to teach them in context. And it costs more to do that, almost double to be able to run that program, but you get 9 times the graduation rate. And that's where, it costs a little bit more, but the productivity goes way through the roof. So it means